friends, today I'm creating meals that you can make when you're low on money. To start out with, I picked up this bag of frozen vegetables at Walmart and these were $1.28, but you can use any vegetables that you already have. Anything is going to work here. I'm going to be using some pasta, but you can make this with just vegetables, flour, and dry spices. But if you have pasta, go ahead and add it in. I'm choosing to use garden rotini for my pasta of choice. I'm going to be using a cup of this, but I'm only making about 1 serving. You can also use a bag of this pasta, and actually you wouldn't need the whole bag. And I frequently see these for only 35 cents in my regular grocery stores. All right, I'm going to be using a cube of bouillon. It is optional. You can also just use dry spices. But I'm going to go ahead and use this one and then probably add in some dry spices as well. And then I'm going to be using some flour in this recipe. And stay tuned and I'll show you what I'm going to be doing with that. But for the pasta, I'm just going to be using 1 cup. You may be cooking this recipe for 4 people. If that's the case, then you want to do 1 cup per person of the noodles. And if you're on a super tight budget, where every penny counts, just go ahead and eliminate the pasta. We'll use the flour and the vegetables to make this dish, but you will need some spices. A viewer told me about this recipe a while back, and I've been saving it to make ever since. And it just sounded really good to me right now. She cooks her aromatics, which included garlic and chili. I'm not using garlic, whole fresh garlic in this, but if you have it, go ahead and use it. And also, many of you are not going to want to have the chili flakes in there, but I'm in the mood for something spicy, so I added mine in there. Just go ahead and omit that if you do not like spiciness in your soup. And I'm adding a ½ teaspoon garlic. If you have the fresh garlic, obviously go ahead and use that. But I'm also using that bouillon cube, which I know is very mild, and I'm going to want more garlic anyway. I'm adding about 4 cups of water, but again, customize this to however much you're wanting to make. I always say that if you're cooking for a family, you have that one pan that you use and you know where the liquid level needs to be. So go ahead and make yours to suit you. And then I'm going to use half of this bag of vegetables. I don't usually go for frozen vegetables, so I was kind of excited to be able to have a recipe to try the frozen veggies with. And these are a little bit big. I do need to cut these. I am so hungry. I didn't have a full breakfast this morning, so I was thinking about this recipe while I was shopping at Walmart, and it just sounds so delicious to me. I cannot wait to try this. Now I'm going to add in a cube of bouillon. If you think about it, a bouillon cube is basically just a bunch of spices added together. So it's a bit of a shortcut. If you have the whole spices, you might as well just use those. My seasoning mixes always taste better than the bouillon that I buy, so I'm sure that it would for you as well. And it might be fun to make your own bouillon, with the spices and then put that in a jar and use that as your spice base for soups going forward. It would make soup night super easy. So just in case you missed that, I did add a little celery salt to this. I love that flavor in my soups. And then I'm also adding a little basil. But go ahead and use whatever spices you have in your pantry. This would work with chicken bouillon or beef bouillon. Really any kind will work. Because we're going to be using noodles, I only want to make the amount that I can possibly eat today. Otherwise, they're going to get soggy. And I almost forgot turmeric and pepper. Pepper helps to enhance the health benefits of turmeric, which is very odd, but it has been researched. So I do always add those into my soup. It has nice flavor, and it also adds a nice color to the dish. I'm going to turn the heat down and let this simmer for a while, and I'm going to quickly make the remaining item of my dish. And for this, we're making dumplings. I've got all-purpose flour, And my viewer used some self-rising flour. So just to keep things as similar as possible, I'm going to add in some baking powder, and I was also going to add in some baking soda, but unfortunately I'm out, and the amount of flour that I used was just a third of a cup, and then I'm adding an 1/8 teaspoon of salt. So I'm trying to make this as easy as possible. You don't have to add anything to this, but if you want to add a seasoning mix, you can. I just happen to have this small amount left in a container of the seasoning mix we made yesterday, so I just added that into there, but it wasn't very much. The broth is so rich and flavorful that, like I said, you really don't need to add anything into this. And then just add enough flour until you get to the consistency of regular dough, which for me is when I pull it up, it kind of pulls back. This definitely needs more salt. The kind of bouillon cube that I used was lower sodium. Tastes a little bland without the right amount of salt. So I added that back in and tasted it again, and it was right to me this time. So now I'm going to go ahead and drop in bite-sized pieces of the flour mixture, and this is going to cook in the broth and make a dumpling. This is the recipe from my viewer. However, a lot of people don't add in dumplings along with noodles because they're obviously both flour products, but I thought it went really well together in this dish. But the reason I'm telling you that is because if you really are on a tight budget, you could just add the dumplings in with the vegetables. It's a great way to make a filling meal out of just a bag of vegetables. You could also use it to make like a chicken and dumpling soup. Maybe add in a can of chicken along with the vegetables, and then this flour mixture to make the dumplings. You could also make like an onion soup with the dumplings. I think that would be nice. And if you did that, you could always add in some flour into the mixture with the onions, and it's going to help to make it a creamy base, just like in that soup that I made, which was like a French onion soup where I topped it with the bread. That turned out really creamy and delicious. You could basically do the same thing here, except add in dumplings. It just goes to show you that you can make a super simple, basic recipe with just onions and flour. In Jamaica, it's very popular to have soups made with these dumplings that are in this shape, and they call them spinners. And those just have flour and water and salt. And so you realize how easy it is to make something delicious with really just a few ingredients. And here I'm preparing my pan because I had some dough left over that I'm just going to fry up into a little flatbread. And my viewer did say that she sometimes likes to add some dried mushrooms to her soup. She also mentioned that she sometimes adds in some tomato paste. So just mentioning these options in case you want to try something. I'm trying to keep this as basic as possible, but I did want to see what this tasted like with the mushrooms, and I do have those in my pantry. So I thought I would just add a few in there so I can see how that works out. I'm pulling this off the heat because I don't want to overcook my noodles. And if you make this recipe at home, just remember that your noodles take about 10 to 12 minutes and your dumplings are going to take about 7 to 8 minutes. So it's probably better to make the dumplings in advance rather than do it the way that I did. I was just super hungry, so I wanted to get everything going. But it ended up working out perfectly for me. but I just want you to be aware that that is something that you need to keep an eye on, because otherwise you're going to end up with some soggy noodles. There's two things you can do with your flatbread. You can either fry it like a tortilla, or you can kind of deep fry it, and it's going to have a fluffy, crunchy texture if you deep fry it. I actually love that texture, but I'm just doing a little more oil than I normally do here because my bread slash pita, whatever it is kind of thick, because I was determined not to get my hands into this mixture. I just used the back of some spoons to kind of spread this out, and this is what I ended up with. But it's great because it couldn't have been easier to make this. Okay, it is time to eat, and I am so hungry. This just looks so good to me, and it smells amazing, and I know it's going to be filling. And I chose a very shallow, wide bowl for this because I didn't want it to have a ton of broth. I wanted it to be somewhere in between like a soup and a regular dish, just enough broth to really give it a lot of seasoning. Obviously, if you're trying to fill tummies, then add a lot more liquid to yours. But this is the way I wanted to eat mine today. And the pasta is perfect. So that's a relief. I didn't overcook the pasta. This is perfectly seasoned. And I like the size of these dumplings. I could see possibly making some kind of dumpling soup with the long spinners where you just use a spoon to kind of break it apart into bite-sized pieces. I think it might be fun to try a Jamaican soup in an upcoming video. And I tried these mushrooms and they were so good in this. They added a nice chewy texture. I have to say, this is, I think, one of my favorite recipes with the cauliflower, because when you bite down into it, it's almost like it holds some of the juice in there, and it's just like a little flavor bomb. Okay, let's try the bread that I made with the leftover dumpling mix. The texture looks perfect, and this is good. You know what? It's always good though. Once you've made tortillas or flatbread, you realize just how easy it is. Okay, so I'm going to give this recipe, I want to give it a 10, but I'm like, is it because I'm so hungry that I give it a 10? I really enjoyed this recipe. I'm going anywhere between a 9 and a 10 on this. So I do hope that you will give this a try, and I want to thank my viewer for mentioning this recipe to me. I'm not sure why, but I've never made baked beans on my channel, and they are such a beloved recipe. I thought they would make a great, inexpensive meal on top of a baked potato. And I do have regular dry beans, but for this, I'm going to go ahead and use canned beans because I'm just cooking for myself, but obviously it's going to be less expensive if you just make a big pot of beans. In fact, I think this is a great recipe for the slow cooker if you want to go that route. And I thought I would set out all the typical things that you would find in baked beans, and ketchup is one of those. And I thought that this is a great recipe if you need to use the ketchup packets. I'm going to use onion powder and some garlic powder. The onion's going to give it a little bit of sweetness as well. And then I'm going to add in some brown sugar, but you can use regular sugar if you want. Or if you want to go extra gourmet, you can always use maple syrup instead of sugar. And then I'm going to add in some Spanish paprika just to give it a touch of smokiness. And then I'll be using some apple cider vinegar. Any vinegar will work, but I think apple cider is the one that's normally used. And this next ingredient is completely optional, but I thought it would be nice to add a tiny amount of chipotle pepper in there. But if you don't have that spice in your cabinet, then just don't even worry about it. And I was cooking this about 4:30 in the morning, so I was a little short on time, and I wanted to microwave my potato for about 3 minutes before I bake it in the oven. And I'm going to use garlic salt on mine, but you can use regular salt if you want. I do love garlic though. Okay, now I'm going to bake this at about 400 degrees for I think about a half an hour and it should be good. I just want it to be nice and soft in the middle and have a nice crisp coating on the outside. And while that's cooking, I'll make my baked beans. I'm adding half teaspoon each of garlic and onion powder. I'm adding 2 teaspoons of brown sugar. And 1 teaspoon of smoky paprika. And I'm going to add 4 packets of ketchup. But if you're adding in tablespoons, it's probably going to be between 1 and 2 tablespoons. And then I'm going to add in 1/8 of a teaspoon of chipotle powder. Lots of recipes call for some kind of mustard. I've got this Dijon mustard in my fridge, so I'm just adding the smallest touch of this. I mean, it's not even about 1/4 of a teaspoon of that. And really, I think you can make a good baked beans as long as you just have the sugar, vinegar, and some kind of tomato base, like either a little tomato sauce or ketchup or something like that. And you notice I did put in the vinegar, and I think that's going to be something highly personal to the level of acidity that you like in your foods. I myself like mine a little more acidic, especially when you're dealing with something like baked beans that can be kind of rich. But these taste delicious. I think I'm going to end up wishing that I had a lot more of this sauce, especially since I'm going to be pouring it over a baked potato. I let it simmer for a while just to develop those flavors, and this is what I ended up with. It is delicious. If you didn't want to bake the potato, you could always cut it into smaller pieces and boil them, and then just pour the baked beans over the top. And then I'm just garnishing it with a little dried parsley. You know, I was thinking too, you could saute some cabbage and onions and put that down on the baked potato first and then put the baked beans over the top. That would have been really good. So many different ways that you could make this. And these beans are fabulous, I have to say. I do love them along with this baked potato. I will say though, I think that this baked potato is way too big for a recipe like this. I think I should have used a smaller potato, and then the ratio of beans to sauce to potato would have been better. That could also be solved by making a big pot of beans, and then you have all of that bean broth to use as a sauce over your potato. And I'm just going to wrap this up and take this for my lunch today. And this may just have been the most filling meal that I've ever eaten. I couldn't even eat the whole thing. Another thing I was thinking when I was eating it, that it would have been really nice with some green onions on top of it. Just something to give it a little bit of freshness and just to add that extra touch. But all in all, I think this was a good recipe.
Morning has broken, my windows are open. Wanna feel the wind blow through my hair. Which way do I follow? What happens tomorrow? I turn to you and hope you can guide the way. Sometimes I give up, just wanna be on my